And I was just like, how do people do this? Like, how do you manage to work and have a kid? Like, it just wasn't adding up for me. And we were like, no. Like, childcare should not just be a women's issue. Winnie is a childcare marketplace. We wanted to make parents' lives easier.
Hey dads, welcome back to another episode of Dad Life Blueprint, where we talk about real challenges and real tools for modern dads. Have you ever struggled to find reliable, affordable, and high quality childcare for your kids? If so, you're definitely not alone. My guest today is Sara Mauskopf. She's the co-founder of Winnie, a game-changing platform that's helping parents all over the country find early childcare options and also out-of-school time options that work for their families. In today's episode, we talk about the childcare crisis, what dads need to know about how the system is shifting, and what you can actually do to make finding care easier. Sara's not only a tech founder, she's also a parent too. So you're getting real talk from someone who's been there. Let's get into it. Sara, welcome to Dad Life Blueprint Podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Even though I'm not a dad, I'm excited to be here.
Of course. So maybe you can just start by kind of taking us back to the very beginning of Winnie, and tell us a little bit about what inspired you to launch Winnie, and was there kind of a personal moment that inspired the launch of the business?
Yes. So Winnie is a childcare marketplace, and believe it or not, what inspired the business was having a child. So this is now almost 10 years ago that I had my first daughter, and I was working at a startup at the time. And it was one of these like really intense startups where you're kind of expected to be in the office at all hours on the weekends and all the time. And I was just like, how do people do this? Like, how do you manage to work and have a kid? Like, it just wasn't adding up for me. And I was talking to a woman that I worked with, Ann Halsell, who, spoiler alert, is now my co-founder at Winnie. And she was a new mom too. And I was just like, how is this possible? And she was like, it really isn't. We should try to build something to make life easier for parents. So that was kind of like our thesis. We wanted to make parents' lives easier. And we also kind of, as a secondary thesis, wanted to build a place that we would want to work, that, we could actually have some work-life balance. And so we started Winnie. We didn't really know what Winnie would be. We tried a bunch of stuff. We built like all these apps and things for parents, and it turned out none of them had product market fit until we built something in childcare, and we focused on group licensed childcare. So it's typically referred to as daycare, preschool, not like babysitters or nannies, because there were other marketplaces for those things. But we found this like big hole in the market when it came to daycare and preschool, which is actually the most common form of childcare that people use for their kids ages 0 to 5. And so, once we hit on that, we kind of like struck gold and was off to the races, and we've been doing it ever since. So we're 9.5 years into building Winnie.
Wow, I love that. And you're so right. Just the idea of making things easier for parents is a really important thing. I know you built Winnie while also being a parent. What has that balance, or maybe sometimes imbalance, look like over the years for you?
Yeah. I mean, so it's funny because when we started Winnie, we had all these grand ideas of like all these things we could do for parents. And then what we kind of discovered was like, on the like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like if you don't have childcare, all this other stuff we're doing doesn't really matter. Like you can't even function. You can't hold down a job.
Yeah.
And we kind of saw that, in full force during COVID. But we started the company before COVID, and people didn't really believe us. They were like, is childcare really that important? It's kind of niche. And we're like, no, it's actually like the thing that keeps especially women in the workforce. Because when childcare is hard to come by, it's actually predominantly the mom who drops out of the workforce. Not always, but in a lot of cases. And so that was kind of like a hard sell to investors at the time. Now I think it's a little bit more understood and obvious, which is great. But that was kind of what we sort of discovered, and seems really obvious in retrospect, that it's really a requirement. You need childcare. And then, for me, like I kind of built the thing that I needed too. As I,
Yeah.
had more kids and as they kept growing, like I realized sort of some of the holes that existed in the market, how hard it was to find childcare, how much you actually redo that search. It's not a one and done thing because you have multiple kids, your kids age, you move. So I
Yeah.
actually ended up doing that search for my own kids like 5 different times, different enrolled in different providers. And it's funny, like now as my kids are in elementary school, we actually have expanded to K-12 schools and things like camps and after school care. So it's kind of funny how the product has kind of aged with me. But
Yeah.
still, daycare and preschool is really our bread and butter. So we will never lose that. But it's been nice to expand and meet my own needs.
Yeah, that's such an important part of entrepreneurship, right? Finding the pain points and you recognize the need just because you needed to find childcare. I love that. What are you seeing in terms of the role that dads are playing in the childcare search and the decision-making process?
Yeah, so one of the big conscious decisions we made when we started Winnie was like we wanted to brand it very gender neutral. And we wanted this to be a product for anyone with children in their lives. There's a lot of kind of products out there that cater to moms, and they're like, "Hi, Mama." That's actually a product that exists, and things of that nature that actually have like mom and motherly and motherhood in
Mhm.
the name. And we were like, no, no, no. Like childcare should not just be a women's issue. It is an issue shared by everyone raising children. And we picked the name Winnie to be really open to everyone using it. And it turns out that has served us well because it also works for childcare providers who are, the other side of our marketplace.
Yeah.
And we've just been very conscious in how we've kind of branded everything from our social media to our content, that it is really geared towards all parents, everyone raising children, because this is a collective effort, and the
Yeah.
more that we kind of involve dads in the mix, I think the easier it is for them to take an active role. My husband was actually a stay-at-home dad for 4 years. That was another form of childcare we used during part of this journey.
Yeah.
And it was really hard for him because he was left out of, a lot of the he wasn't in the moms groups, he wasn't in the nanny groups. When there was an
Yep.
emergency in preschool, they would still call me. The school still does call me, even though he's listed as the emergency contact. And
Yeah.
so it's really hard to be in charge when no one will really include you in the information sharing, or include you in the networks. And so we really wanted to open this up and be like, no, this is a network for everyone that has children in their lives.
Yeah, I love that. And I've been on both sides of the childcare space where I've been a teacher in childcare settings and seen it from the provider perspective. And then also now as a parent, there has been a lot of positive change, like you've mentioned, but I also think there's still room for improvement. One of the things that my wife and I talk about, and I don't know if you're familiar with Brightwheel app, which is
Mhm.
for anybody not familiar, it's an app that allows you to sign in and out your child.
Yeah.
A lot of childcare centers use it. And we're in a blended family. Our son,
Mm.
his biological dad has him 50% of the time, and then we have him the other 50%. And we either all had to share an account, which just what didn't make any sense. Like we would have had to do it through one email, which
Yeah.
again, I think puts the onus on typically the mom, and we finally were able to find a solution where she and I are on one account and then his dad's on another, but they were able to set it up where we could all see when he's checked in and out. But I just wonder if you've seen that kind of thing in Winnie, and just like thinking about blended families, some of those things that blended families face that are maybe a little unique.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important for people to think about this when designing products for parents and families and children, is like
Mhm.
every family looks different. And so if you design it around, the traditional, like mom is the, person in charge of all the family stuff and she makes all the decisions and she gets all the information, like that's actually not how families operate now. And you're just reinforcing gender stereotypes. And yeah, blended families add a whole new layer to the mix.
Yeah.
So we try to be really careful about that, but I agree, it is not the norm. And it causes all these problems when you're trying to actually do what's right for the child. And
Yeah.
what's right for the child is to have all the parents and caregivers involved. And some of these apps make that very difficult. Just some of the ways that schools are structured and preschools are structured to communicate also makes it difficult
Yeah.
for kind of all the caregivers to get information.
Yeah. And it strikes me too that a lot of I know at least in our family we have a lot of support, local support from my wife's parents are in town, and so they oftentimes will pick him up, and then his dad's mom is also in town. My
Yeah.
parents live in North Carolina, so they would help if they were here. But I think there's just like you said, there's not any kind of one size fits all family structure. And I think it's really great that you all are kind of thinking in terms of that.
And I
And
think it's great that you're doing a podcast for dads
yeah,
and like
yeah,
also talking about these things. Like not all families look the same. And in fact, more families look different than look like the quote traditional like stay-at-home mom family. That's actually not
yeah,
the way a lot of families look now. So yeah, it's important to kind of shine a light on all these different structures and ways of doing things.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, I know you launched Winnie, and it was already a time when parents were struggling around finding quality care, and then all of a sudden we had this pandemic. So, what are the biggest challenges that parents continue to face around finding quality childcare?
Yeah, the pandemic was interesting because a lot of what was being reported in the news and like all these like kind of scare stories, we were not finding in our data. So there was a lot of information out there about like childcare centers are closing and there's no more childcare, it's all gone. But in fact, we actually saw the opposite. Like the childcare centers needed to operate during the pandemic because they don't operate, they don't make money, and they're not like public schools that get funding from the government. So while schools closed, a lot of K-12 schools, especially public schools, did not operate in person. It
Yeah,
was the child care centers that did continue after a brief, like there were a few months when some of them would temporarily close
yeah,
to kind of readjust to the norms. But very quickly, they all opened. And I actually like kept my oldest in preschool for an extra year. So she's still like a whole year older than all of her classmates. And I did that because it was the only thing in our neighborhood operating in person. And as like a working parent, there was just no way I was going to be able to homeschool her. And so like for the rest of her life, she will now be a year older than all of her peers. And that is like you know, she will feel that effect of the pandemic
yeah,
forever. But I think that just illustrates like the pandemic actually showed how strong and needed and essential the childcare industry is. So it's been interesting because we've gone through so many like cycles as a company. Like we've seen the markets be really good and we've seen like news about there's a recession, everything's
yeah,
crashing. But like actually the childcare industry remains relatively stable.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
one of the more recession-proof industries. And we still see that today. Like, now I guess we're in a time where things are a bit more unstable, you might say, in the economy, but
right,
like things are kind of business as usual for childcare.
yeah,
With the like caveat that I think parents are taking a little bit longer to make like a big purchase decision like childcare. We are seeing some of that in our data,
yeah.
especially if they're concerned about losing their job or maybe they just lost their job. But for the most part, it is a pretty resilient industry, which is nice and like a testament to how critical this service is.
And what are the kind of the biggest struggles that parents do face when they're looking at the menu of options out there in childcare? What are the biggest kind of things that in your data you're seeing drive decisions around what to choose?
The number one thing is cost. Like
Yeah.
families, uh, the biggest struggle is affording childcare. And I think, some of the narrative around affordability of childcare is just a little bit like I wish it would change. Instead of
Yeah.
it being like childcare is so expensive, like I can't believe it. It costs more than college in some for some places and what college costs. Like actually it should be expensive. It's a really critical service. It's not
Yeah.
only critical as a foundation for children, it's also critical in enabling parents to work.
Yeah.
So instead of like, oh my gosh, why is it so expensive? How do we get the cost down? How about like, how do we actually subsidize that cost through
Right.
government and through employers and like, not that it is too expensive for what it is. Like it should be a very expensive service. It's a very, very valuable. So
Yeah.
that's like my personal kind of nitpick. But I get the sentiment. Like it's too expensive for families to shoulder that whole burden. That's for sure. And that's like the number one factor that, it changes what someone can do and how they, whether they can stay in the workforce and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
I know it's a kind of a hot button topic within the childcare industry, this idea around quality and the use of the term quality. Sometimes people refer to it as quality care. And there's different, organizations out there. You can get a YC license for your childcare center, different things like that to help parents discern what's high quality, what's not. Talk a little bit about that. What's your what are your thoughts on that? How has Winnie sort of helped parents navigate through that when they're searching?
Yeah, I mean, the number one reason we got into group license care in the first place, besides it being a huge market, is that there is a quality check. There's a quality measure in every single state, and that is you have to be licensed. So unlike a marketplace where you are vetting the entire supply, we have this huge advantage. We had this huge advantage when starting Winnie, which is that we are only working with licensed businesses. And to be a licensed childcare provider, there's actually a number of hoops you have to go through. Like every state requires that everyone who works in the childcare center is background checked,
Yeah.
fingerprinted. You have to go through CPR and first aid training. You have to have your premises inspected on an annual basis. There are additional kind of like surprise checks that you get throughout. So it actually is a pretty heavily regulated industry. Some would even argue it may be a little over-regulated in certain cases. Um, so that is nice. And then every state on top of that has their kind of own quality rating system. And so it's called Curus, and it is like a pretty strong measure of quality. It's not the only measure.
Right.
There are other ways to measure quality, including like what other parents say about the program. So we, have reviews and ratings on Winnie. But there is kind of a number of things in place already that you kind of get for free just because childcare is a pretty heavily regulated industry, unlike kind of nannies and babysitters, which is completely unregulated.
Yeah, yeah. And I know another challenge for parents is parents don't realize, especially if they're having their first child, they need to get on a list for childcare before the child's born often. Uh,
So that's a myth. And I want to I want to
yeah,
come
you
in
gotta talk
here
about
and
this.
like
Yeah.
dispel this myth. It is 100% a myth. Childcare centers across the board, across the United States, uh, need families. They need families to enroll in their programs. There, in every city, you can usually find a very popular, usually it's part of a well-marketed chain that has a long wait list. And that is kind of adds to this rumor and this like folklore that, it is so hard to get childcare because the Bright Horizons near me has a long wait list.
Yeah.
That is true. That particular center may have a long wait list, maybe because it's employer subsidized. But there are plenty of childcare centers, including home daycares, single centers that are not well marketed that do not have wait lists. And that's part of the kind of reason that Winnie exists in the first place is like we uncovered that there was actually a lot of supply that was really poorly marketed does not have a website, doesn't have a presence on the internet. Really, you can only find it on Winnie. And that's kind of like why we created the site in the first place. Make it easier for these businesses to market themselves, because we've also discovered that like your marketing savvy does not equal your quality as a provider. It can, like there are very marketing savvy, high quality providers, but there are also a lot of childcare providers that are, sole proprietors. They operate a business out of their home. They're licensed and regulated by the state. They
Yeah.
provide really great, flexible, individualized care to 6 kids, and they have absolutely no marketing. And so those can be great options. And in fact, you cannot get on a wait list before your child is born. Everyone will say to do this, but it is not a thing. No provider has that kind of visibility into their pipeline
Sure.
in 9 months from now, 6 months from now, maybe 3 months from now. They have some sense of like who's going to graduate out of the program. But for the most part, they won't even take your inquiry unless you have a child kind of ready to enroll.
Yeah. So what do you recommend then for like the dads out there, um, that are, they're expecting their first child, or maybe they're expecting another child, and they want to take the lead on this. They take the lead on searching for childcare options. Um, do they just go to the site, start searching, or are there some pre-steps that they should do to kind of think before they jump onto Winnie, or what's the best
So I
kind of
think there's
starting
nothing
point?
wrong with searching in advance of having a child. And in fact, I wish more parents kind of went into having a child a little more eyes wide open on like what the costs may be. So use Winnie, get a sense of the costs near you, because a lot of providers do list their prices, not enough, but some do.
Yeah.
You can get a sense of like what it will cost, which will help you budget, and just not be so sticker shocked when it comes time to actually enroll. So I don't think there's anything wrong with researching early, but just know that a lot of providers, even if you inquire and tour, if your child isn't born yet, like they're not really going to talk to you yet or have
Right.
a lot of time to handle your inquiry. So you may be left with the impression that like there's not spaces or they're not interested, when really like they need to focus on like filling their spots now for the
Right.
children who are ready to be in their program. Um, I think another big thing to start thinking about early on is like what form of childcare you want to use. And this can definitely be something you constantly reevaluate and change. It's not like you're stuck with this for the next 5 years, but just understanding like, do I want to have a stay-at-home parent for the first however much time? And do I
Yeah.
want to have a nanny, or do I want to enroll in a licensed group environment? And do I want like a bigger center, or do I want like a small home daycare? Um,
Yeah.
so kind of understanding those different options, what might be available. And, if you live in parts of the country where there may not be a lot of options, like that may also be limiting to your choice in terms of like what you can even choose.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really those are great tips. And I also I think another thing that I think it's important for parents to realize is just like other things like a job, or frankly even like housing, like you don't have to think of it as so permanent, right? I mean,
Yes.
for our son, he was in one childcare setting for the first part of his life, and then we moved him into another center when we found a spot opened up at that center. And so you can, and then part of that was based on him too, right? I think like some kids, like he's a kid that needed a little bit smaller setting with like less kids in a room and a little bit more focused attention. And so I think it's okay for parents to realize that once you see how your child is doing in a setting, that you might adjust what you want out of a setting based on your child. And
Yeah.
I think that's okay too.
I see this too with like parents who choose a nanny.
Mhm.
Um, and then they're like, oh no, I can't possibly change now, even though it's not working out, because my child has bonded with this nanny. They've like become like family. So I have to like stick it out with this nanny that's like really just not working for what our family needs right now.
Yeah.
And the truth is that like it is actually good for children to form bonds and connections with multiple caregivers and teachers. Now, like as parents, like you should be pretty stable parts of your
Yeah.
child's life. Like you don't
Yeah.
want the parents to go in and out.
Yeah.
They can, of course, separate, but like they still need to be involved in the child's life. That's pretty critical. But
Yeah.
like to have a nanny who is not a parent, very clearly not a parent, play a prominent role when a child is a newborn and then not play a role when they're 1 or 2 and ready for a group environment is like perfectly fine and will not damage the child at all. It is actually good for the child, and it will damage you if you stick it out with a form of childcare that is just not working for your family. Maybe it's too expensive. Maybe it's just not providing your child with the right socialization. This is definitely something you can reevaluate. Like my kids have changed their childcare situation every year.
Yeah.
And I think they're better for it. And like, in fact, when you enter grade school, like you get new teachers every year. This is very normal.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that Winnie's growth has been really impressive over the 9 years that it's existed. What innovations or trends in early childhood care are you most excited about right now?
Well, I'm very excited about AI. I think, you know, even just over the last decade of building Winnie, like there were so many things that like we just couldn't do because
Mhm.
we could not do them at scale across 250,000 childcare businesses that exist. Like it would have just been way too expensive or way too manual or take too much time. And like now these things are possible. Uh, and it's just opening up like a whole new world for us. We're kind of like kids in a candy shop. So one example is like, this is kind of a dumb example, but it's a feature we just built and are about to roll out. Is like we manually reviewed every photo that a childcare provider uploaded to Winnie because we don't want like any inappropriate photos on our site, and like it's just uh, too important of a of a thing, too much of a liability to have like bad photos out there. So this is like a decently sized expense for us. Like we have to employ 2 people that like review the content that providers upload. And it's really frustrating for the childcare providers because they'll upload a photo and then it'll be in a review queue and they're like, did it work? I'm going to upload it again. I'm going to write into support. Um, Now with AI, we have a feature that provides instant feedback. Like it can immediately get rid of anything that doesn't meet our policy guidelines. But it can also provide feedback to providers and like you just uploaded like a weird logo and like that's not good. That's not going to help advertise your page, or you just uploaded like what looks like a stock photo and it's like not going to help parents make a decision about your childcare. Um, and so like that's just something that we would have never contemplated, actually being able to provide feedback, real-time feedback. Like it just wasn't possible for the scale of how many childcare providers are on Winnie. And now it's like an easy, like, 1 week feature to build with AI. So I think it's definitely exciting to have like the same old business, but
Yeah.
now be able to like literally look at every feature we ever wanted to build. And now like some of them are just easy wins.
Wow, I love that. I know you've also introduced job boards, right? Free
Yes.
preschool search, special needs filters on the app. And also you mentioned the summer care and the after school care. Are there new features coming soon?
So much. I mean, the big thing we just rolled out was K-12 schools.
Yeah.
Um, And you might, ask why? Like, don't you just go to your local, districted public school? And the answer is still the majority of the time, yes, you do.
Yeah.
But increasingly now, people are looking at public charter school options, public magnet schools that you need to qualify and apply to, independent schools, religious schools, homeschooling, micro schools. I mean, these things went from being like very obscure and like less than 1% to now they are actual percentage points of people using
Yeah.
these other forms of schooling. So whether or not you agree with this trend or like this trend, it is a trend that's happening. And so we want to be there kind of helping parents make these decisions and understanding, why your local public school may be the right choice for you, or maybe it's this charter school that's nearby that's also free. Um, so I think that'll be like a big kind of growth vector for us and also allow us to kind of grow up with our population.
I love the after school piece too. I know that can be challenging. Some kids-based schools offer it if they're in school, if they're school age. Some preschool programs don't run through the summer, so there's a
Yeah.
lot of that kind of stuff that you have to think about as a parent. I wonder on the business end, have a lot of folks jump on to that, or has it been having to go
Yeah.
out and find these different programs? Because I know there's a lot out there, but I'm guessing it's sort of similar to the childcare where like there's stuff that you probably won't find because they don't have good marketing, right? So talk a little bit
Yeah.
about the process. How do you find these places for the after school and the summer programs?
Yeah, it's hard because unlike childcare for ages 0 to 5, which is licensed and regulated in every state, when
Yeah,
you get into programs for older kids, so
yeah,
school age kids, whether it's summer care or aftercare, whether or not they need to be licensed depends on the state. We actually have like this huge guide on our
yeah,
winnie.com/resources about like camps in every state because the rules are different in terms of whether summer camps need to be licensed. So in states where they don't have to be licensed, uh, and in fact, there is no licensing process if you operate a summer camp. Like there is no directory of every summer camp. Like it may be the karate studio that runs a program, or the ballet studio, and they're just like doing their thing.
right.
So one of the ways and reasons we can even be in that business is because we have built this childcare database. And so we've built like a brand, and some of these providers come to us. So they will add their free page to Winnie. Why not? It's free marketing for their camp or
Yeah,
after school program. And that's one of the ways we kind of have built our database. But in fact, like AI helps a lot here too when kind of gathering data that was previously very hard or manual to gather. It can help kind of identify some of these data sources and programs that exist. Um,
yeah.
but yes, it is actually a lot harder than the licensed childcare space.
Yeah, but I love that you all are doing this because a lot of parents don't even know where to begin when it comes to after school care or summer care. It could be local theaters, it could be
Yeah.
dance studios that are offering things, and people just don't necessarily know to look there. Children's museums, and a lot of times people are starting from their base school, but if they don't offer something that works for their family, then they might be kind of trying to figure out or panicking, what are we gonna do? So they should go to Winnie and search that.
It's a huge challenge. We are, you know, scratching the surface on the kind of camps and aftercare, but I agree. It's like it is such a huge challenge that working parents face because my kids are off like it
Yeah.
seems like every week they're off for something and I still have to work. I only just get the major holidays off. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you noticed any patterns about how moms and dads make decisions around childcare or after school care and see things in different ways? Or is that something you track at all or
We
seen
don't
it?
track that holistically, but we have talked to parents about it and we have done some different studies on it. One of the things we've definitely noticed when talking to like especially moms is a lot of times they'll be like, look, the math is just not adding up for me to pay for childcare because my salary kind of that I take home after taxes is not really that much more than I would have to shell out for this preschool, especially now that I have two kids and one has to be in infant daycare, one has to be in preschool, I
Yeah.
might as well just stay home. And what I want to just spread out there to the world, and especially to dads listening to this, is that is the wrong math. You have to be thinking about kind of your future earning potential and not just this 1 year of your earnings maybe not working out to do the math, because
Yeah.
childcare, the costs do get less over time. As your
Yeah.
kids age, you start, you know, hopefully, unless you're going with a very expensive private school, like only having to pay for things like aftercare and camps,
Yeah.
which is less. And then when your children are in high school, you're not paying for any of that. They're getting
Yeah.
a summer job, so you're good. But your earning should be growing over time. And if you drop out of the workforce, you are, first of all, like making it much harder for yourself to get back in and potentially earn in future years. But you're also losing out on those years of kind of rising in the ranks and your salary increasing and kind of
Yeah.
compounding over time. So I always encourage families, like, yes, there are some cases where the math really just won't work, but look at your earnings as a whole. If you have a partner, look at what you both make combined. And as long as that is enough that you can pay for childcare combined, I really think you should think twice about dropping out of the workforce just for financial reasons alone. And I see
Yeah.
way more often than not that it's women that are kind of only considering their salary. Um, and when men don't make enough, they're like, no, it's fine. Like, I'm going to make more. Like, I'm just doing my
Yeah.
startup, or like, it's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
They're not, saying I should drop out because I don't make enough to pay for childcare.
I hadn't thought about that. And I love this, because I think it probably causes a snowball effect, particularly for women if they drop out. Like you said, um, they're out of the workforce for a number of years, then it's harder to get back in, and it's a snowball effect, right? That impacts pay equity, right? Over, if nothing else, pay equity, and
And even worse, like a lot of times they don't re-enter. Instead, they do free labor by volunteering for their child's school.
right,
And
right,
like, while I love that and it makes the world go round, and like I am a beneficiary of all the parents, especially moms, that are
yeah,
doing free labor for my kids' school, like I always like to point out that, like, you're not getting paid for that. So you just dropped out of the workforce because you didn't make enough to afford care. And now you are doing a bunch of work and not doing
yeah,
care, but you're not getting paid for it.
yeah,
And I just see this so often disproportionately impact women. And if that's what you want to do, great. Everyone
yeah.
should do them and do what they want to do. But if you're making a decision for financial reasons, like, you have to think about the impact of that long term. And like, once you leave, it is very, very hard to come back, and especially at the same level you were at.
This, I guess that's one way that dads can emotionally support their partner by encouraging them not to drop out, to really think about it from another perspective and think about that long-term earning potential. What are some other ways that dads can really be better at supporting the whole process around finding care, both in terms of the labor and logistics, emotional tools?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely, like, finding childcare should be a group project.
Yeah.
There's no reason that this has to be something that falls on moms. So I agree. Like, if dads even can take the lead in doing this research, and actually we see that on Winnie, that like a lot of times the dads like our tool because it is something that kind of democratizes the information.
Yeah.
They can take the lead on finding the places, doing the research, booking the
Yeah.
tours. Sometimes you may attend those tours together, make a decision, and great, you're good. And then, once you're enrolled in the childcare program, like you said, like, it shouldn't just fall on the mom to manage all of the day-to-day communication and volunteering and, pick up and drop off, and really sharing that so everyone is an equal participant. I think that can sometimes be extra hard for dads because they are left out of the loop. Like, I can't tell you how many times I have to, like, loop my husband back in, be like, actually, like, since you're owning this, and my husband is really the primary parent in our household, like,
Yeah.
but people come to me because I'm the mom. And so just making sure he's constantly looped back in so he can take the ownership that, he wants to take.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about the folks that are just kind of like, well, I could just Google all this. Talk about like your sales pitch on why Winnie versus just researching on your own.
Well, a lot of people will start on Google and
Yeah.
then land on Winnie. So
Yeah.
we'll say that that is the way we get the majority of our traffic. Because like, you'll search for best Montessori preschools near me, and then you'll land on a
Yeah.
Winnie page and go from there. Um, I think where Winnie really shines is like in making the contact with the providers, because Google may, list the local businesses near you and you can see them on a map. But then you have to actually take the next step of,
Yeah.
submitting your inquiry, scheduling the tour. And also, I think we just have a better platform for kind of filtering by the kind of childcare specific stuff, which is
Yeah.
like, I want part-time versus full-time. I want to look at the prices. That stuff is not really well listed on Google since they don't really build a product for specifically the childcare search.
Right. Right. And do you notice any generational shifts, Gen Z versus millennial parents, how they're approaching childcare in general or choices around childcare?
It's interesting. We like when we started Winnie, it was millennials like beginning to have kids, and now we're like kind of hitting towards the end of that, which is
Yeah.
like just crazy. And so I think we actually did do a study like in our early days about how millennial parents are different from prior generations of parents. But what we haven't done is like Gen Z now versus millennials as parents, which I think would be really interesting. So that is a very good idea. Um, but with the big like thing we discovered about millennial parents that when compared to prior generations is like they are expecting to do everything online, and like the way the childcare industry works is they want you to come in and tour a
Right.
center. That is
Right.
always the next step in the process. And it's just like not the way millennials are used to purchasing anything else that they purchase. So it creates like this huge friction and pain point, and it's like kind of something we're always trying to solve for. Like, how do we align these two parties? One that like wants you to physically come into the center to tour it, to even get like pricing information or to know if there's open spaces, and like millennials, and I'm sure Gen Z too, that's just like, give me the damn information. And then, right before I make my decision, I'll come stop by for a tour, but like, give me all the info up front. So we're trying to bridge that gap. But it is still a slog to get the childcare providers to understand that parents today want information at their fingertips.
Yeah. And in fact, I'm guessing that particularly Gen Z sees it as they're hiding something if they don't get the transparency. Right? They
Yeah.
want information, transparency. They want to make the decision. They
Yeah.
don't want to kind of have to jump through a bunch of hoops. What kind of advice would you give to parents? What advice do you have when they're hopefully sitting down, having these conversations about childcare? You mentioned thinking about size, what's going to work for your family. Anything else that you think is important for parents to be thinking about when they're thinking of what's going to work for them?
I mean, I kind of agree with what you said earlier. Like, you can always change what
Yeah.
you've
Yeah.
decided. You make the best decision with the information you have now. And when you get more information, you can make a different decision. And also, like, a little bit of adversity for children is okay, which
Yeah.
means like, if you're entering a new environment and your child is like, has different rules at preschool than they do at home. And it's like maybe a little bit confusing because maybe at preschool, like they have to nap in a nap mat, and at home they get to nap with their back being rubbed. Like,
Right.
that's okay. Like, kids adjust, they're flexible. And like, in fact, if they get through a little bit of these challenges where it's like just a little bit different and they like realize they can do it, it might be hard at first, but they make it through and they figure it out and they get to the other side. um, that can actually build like stronger, more resilient kids. So I think like I personally, in the beginning of being a parent, I looked for an environment that was just like exactly like my philosophy for raising
Yeah.
kids. And I was like,
Yeah.
if it isn't, it must be bad. But the truth is, you just need a really loving, nurturing environment. And all the other stuff is just kind of a little bit of nuance. And it's
Yeah.
okay if it differs from, your home environment to your childcare environment. So I think that's my advice for parents is also you can be a little flexible in the environment you choose for childcare. And if they have kind of slightly different routines or rules or ways of doing things, it can be okay as long as it's ultimately a very loving, nurturing place.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a good exercise in that flexibility and resiliency. I've been on the other side where I've been a teacher in
Hmm.
classrooms, and I have to remind my wife of this when we get feedback about our child from the teacher that he's one of many kids in a classroom, and the teacher's not sharing all the other things that she's saying to other parents about their children with us. She's just giving us the information about our child. So
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean he's the only one that's doing this behavior. We're just getting the information specifically to our child. And I think sometimes parents have a tendency to forget that that
But
feedback
also
really.
like take advantage of your children's teachers in
Yeah,
these early education environments because they have the benefit of seeing your child compared to other kids of the same age,
yeah,
and potentially also years of history of children of that age.
yeah.
And they can often spot things before your pediatrician, before
Mhm.
you, because they're seeing it in context. And like my daughter had a speech impediment that, like, for years, the pediatrician told me she was fine. Like, everyone, I took her in for a speech evaluation. They said, like, Jess, she's probably fine. This is like developmental. And like the preschool was flagging it. And they were like, we cannot understand her. We can understand the other kids. And it's frustrating her. And like, she had to do years of speech therapy to fix it. I wish I would have like forced it earlier, but like everyone else was reassuring me besides the preschool that she was fine. And so I think it is like really, they really have a lot of like, sometimes they can't even articulate like what they're seeing. But they have so much muscle memory for like how kids should be acting and what their milestones should be at that age that they can often spot things. Sometimes you have to pull it out of them because they may not want to share that or like worry a parent. But like this stuff is so when you can do some early intervention for, you know, even like things like, autism
Yeah.
and uh, reading issues that will come up more when your child is 4 or 5. But like these things, when you intervene early, you can actually change the course of, their development. Um, and so like definitely if you have any concerns, like the preschool teacher is often like your best advocate um, to know when your child is kind of behaving differently.
Yeah, seeing your child's teachers as allies or partners is really, really important. And I'd add on too that, seeing your child in a social setting where they're in a community of other kids, there's a lot more structure, and they're seeing your child in a structured environment with their peers. And like you said, there's a lot more that they can pick up on in those kinds of settings. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to highlight about either, Winnie specifically, childcare search, things that you think parents should know about as they're entering into looking for where their kids are going to find care?
I mean, I think we could talk for like hours about this. And I love your questions, and I love that you're building an audience of dads, which is just so critical.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't want to bore your listeners with going on and on about childcare. I would just say like there's a lot of kind of scary things you'll hear, scary headlines about it's so hard to find care and it's so expensive and you can't possibly manage, but like you find a way, you will find a great environment. There are so many options. Providers these days are dying for you to fill their open spaces.
Yeah.
And so like, I always just like to take the stress down a notch and like tell parents that like there are plenty of great options out there and you will figure it out.
I love it. I love it. Well, one final question for you, Sarah. I always ask my dads for a story, a parenting story. I'm wondering if you can share a mom story, your favorite mom moment, maybe something great that happened or something challenging.
Oh my gosh. I have so many so many challenging moments and good moments too.
Yeah.
I was just really proud of my kids. So yesterday was Mother's Day. I don't know when this is going to air, but for when we're filming this, and like so I always felt like it was on my husband to kind of like choreograph the day and like
Yeah.
make sure that everyone got me a card and like made the day special. And I feel like this was really the first year that like my kids really took the initiative and like did their own stuff for me. Like they all, and I think it was a lot of my eldest daughter, of course, like taking over that role, but it just felt really good to see them really take the lead on recognizing me.
I love that. I just saw a funny meme being shared. It was like a Onion newscast. Americans finish up celebrating Mother's Day at like 9:15 a.m. It was cooking fun. But I actually do believe that a lot of families are out there doing really beautiful things to really celebrate moms. And so it's great to hear that your kids took that initiative and really
Of
took
course, we also had to trek an hour away for my daughter's soccer game that day. But no, that was fun to watch. I like watching
Yeah.
soccer. So.
Well, great. Well, it's been so wonderful having you on the podcast, Sarah. I really appreciate your time and the knowledge that you have shared. And I love the Winnie app. I really encourage all the dads, all the listeners out there to go check out Winnie. It's a really amazing tool for helping find not only early childhood care, but also after school care, summer care. And I'm sure there'll be more to come with Winnie. So definitely check it out. We'll put all the information in the show notes. And just want to thank you again for your time and coming on the program and for all that you shared.
Thanks for having me.
A huge thank you to Sarah for joining us today on Dad Life Blueprint, and also for all the work that she and Winnie are doing to help parents everywhere find childcare. And if this episode resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment about your own childcare story. We definitely want to hear it. And remember, being a great dad is not about perfection. It's about showing up with intention. We've got some more great interviews, parenting deep dives, and resources coming your way. So be sure to subscribe to the channel for more. Catch you on the next one.